Hi everyone, Materim here, with the first in a new line of videos I'm calling Tales from the Table. What these videos are going to be is me just talking a little bit about stuff that's happened at my gaming table in the past or currently, just to share some stories and see what you guys think and present things that I thought were particularly awesome, cool, or regrettable. Today's topic is going to be in the latter of those categories, and is going to be called The Worst Paladin Ever. And this is the story of the worst paladin I've ever had in any of my games. This was in a 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons game. And I've actually done a video about this particular player in the past. If you do a search for my worst player ever videos, this is him. And this paladin, there were a lot of things wrong with it, but I'm going to focus on kind of the last point of this particular paladin. This was, well, I guess I should start. For those of you who don't really focus on D&D, the paladin class is a holy warrior who is bound by the strictures of law and goodness. In addition, most of them worship various gods, or a particular god rather. So they're bound to that god's ethos as well. Basically, the obedient holy knight is the archetype that it draws from. And most people who have played D&D before can tell you the difficulties playing with paladins or as paladins. Because they usually rely on having very little wiggle room in terms of how they uphold their ethos. They are bound to be the lawful good alignment. If they ever change, they will lose all their class powers. They're also bound to follow the strictures of their particular god. Again, bad things start to happen if you don't. So, this particular paladin, we were playing kind of a high-level campaign, and he worshipped my homebrew world's god of friendship and love. So he was all about, at least his ethos was all about, defending the party, protecting them, and spreading the glory of his goddess. This took place in a particularly dark era of my world's history, where the worship of this particular goddess was on the wane, and part of what he was sent out to do was to inspire the common folk, excuse me, and kind of restart the church here. So as they quested and leveled up, eventually this paladin came across a holy sword to his goddess. He was sent on the quest to find this sword by his goddess. And again, for those of you who know D&D, the holy sword is kind of the biggest, shiniest magic item that a paladin possibly could get. It is a blessed sword of their god that gives them just awesome abilities, including the ability to project a circle of power where their god's will just denies weaker magics from having any effect on them. It's pretty awesome. And this particular sword, I came up with a great backstory for. It was actually created by a priestess of his god who sacrificed her life to empower the sword, which meant that in addition to being a holy avenger, the sword was intelligent, meaning that the personality and essence of that priestess was bound within the blade. So it was basically an NPC. It could talk to him, and took on kind of an advisory role to this particular player, becoming his confessor, really, because his church was so small, he didn't really interact much with many priests of his faith, because he was out adventuring instead of in the sort of areas of their power. So it was really a very interesting NPC, a very interesting item, and it helped him out in a number of different encounters. Then they came upon an enemy that they defeated that had been wielding a Vorpal axe. Again, for those of you who don't know D&D, a Vorpal axe or sword or whatever it is has the ability on a certain roll or higher to lop the head off the enemy that you're fighting, killing them instantly. So it's a pretty powerful magical item. Our paladin became obsessed with it. He thought it was a very powerful item and laid claim to it for his own. Which there's not really anything wrong with that. by their strictures in the rules under 2nd edition, paladins are allowed to have up to 4 separate magical weapons. So, if he wanted that as a backup weapon to use it in particularly appropriate times, no big deal. The problem came when the paladins started using this weapon pretty much. It was the only weapon he used. And further than that, he seemed to start looking for fights, just so that he could wield his awesome sword and chop things' heads off. As you can imagine, this is not necessarily the best thing that a priest of the god of love and friendship really should be undertaking. So he starts leaving his sword behind, not wielding it often, and his god is not happy about this, because he's not doing his great deeds with this weapon of his faith. It's not becoming the symbol that it was intended to help rally the peasants around and build up the faith, and basically everything that the character had set up his entire backstory, or the entire character motivation to do on behalf of his goddess. So, I start giving him hints. The sword starts talking to him. Other NPCs start talking to him, going, hey, where was that sword? Blah, 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 blah. Trying to drop little subtle hints. I don't know at this point whether the paladin chose not to pick up on those hints, or whether he was just so enthralled at the ability to just lop dudes' heads off in a single hit. Either way, he did not pay heed to any of this. So after a certain amount of time, of the paladin basically becoming belligerent and ignoring the will of his goddess, and refusing to even, give the sword even time. I mean, at a certain point, he was actually leaving the sword in his saddlebags on the horse instead of taking it in. And for those of you who've ever played a paladin, particularly in the old editions, that sounds just insane. But it gets worse. So eventually, after all of these warnings are not working, and he's in danger of losing his paladinhood, but his goddess, being the goddess of love and friendship, is very forgiving. So she gives him one last chance, and she sends an angel down to speak with him. Now, this should be a pretty huge event. I mean, actual divine intervention to give you kind of one last chance to clean your shit up should be a pretty obvious note to anybody. So he starts talking to this angel, and the angel basically lays it out. Your god gave you this weapon to be a symbol to the people, to serve the goddess. You have sworn yourself into her service. You should probably do what she says. It wasn't quite that ordered, but it was, hey, your god is concerned about doing this and that. This paladin decided that the rational, reasonable response to this final request from his god was to attack the angel with the Vorpal sword, or with the Vorpal axe, in an attempt to cut its head off. Wow. So I even gave him surprise on the angel, and I was like, okay, the angel is certainly not expecting you to attack it with this Vorpal sword, but it's essentially on a mission of mercy to prevent you from falling as a paladin. So the paladin player rolls his to hit roll. It's garbage, doesn't come anywhere even close to hitting the angel. The angel then proceeds to yank the Vorpal axe out of his hand, hurl it over the horizon to God's nowhere, and without even drawing a weapon, physically beat the paladin into unconsciousness, and essentially leave him for the now very angry party to deal with, because most of them witnessed him attempting to murder a divine agent. Needless to say, this paladin lost his paladinhood, and even as forgiving a goddess as she was, assaulting the angels of the Lord doesn't really cut it. So, this is pretty easily the worst paladin I've ever seen. And there may, I mean, I'm sure there's folks who are going to be like, oh, well, you were restricting his character too much, or you were giving orders and he didn't want to take orders. My argument to that point is if you want to play a character who is a rebel and who is their own boss and that sort of thing, don't play a paladin. You know, particularly in the old games, you know what that's supposed to be. And if you can't cut it, there's no harm in staying away from those classes. Now, folks I've seen play paladins amazingly well, and it adds a lot to the game. But I think in the long run, paladins are one of those classes, particularly in the old games, that one played badly can have just horrible effects on the group. Everything from internal fighting to situations like this where it completely just breaks everyone's suspension of disbelief and kind of goes off on a strange left turn. If you can't handle the paladin, don't roll it up. That's pretty much my takeaway from this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. This was kind of the first of these. I'm hoping not all of them will end up being so negative, because I also want to share good things that have happened at the table and kind of my fallout from that. And I love hearing stories about people's games, and hopefully you guys enjoyed hearing this one from me. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything, please leave them down below. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.